In today's business world, change is the only constant, and mastering transformation is the ultimate key to success. Welcome to Shift and Thrive. I'm your host, Natalie Nathanson. Each week, we'll bring you conversations with CEOs who delve into how they successfully drove critical change in their organization. This show is sponsored by Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service B2B marketing agency. I am very excited to introduce today's guest. He is a global go-to-market leader and advisor with over 25 years of experience, including building and scaling high-performing go-to-market teams across Europe, North America, Latin America, and Asia Pacific. He's led organizations responsible for over $70 million in annual recurring revenue and managing sales teams of over 100, and all while delivering consistent year-over-year growth. Earlier in his career, he spent over 15 years at Forrester Research, where I had the pleasure of working with him. And in that time there, he led multiple major business transformations before moving into sales, senior leadership roles at LinkedIn, and more recently served as Chief Sales Officer at Onclusive. Today, he advises early and mid-stage technology companies on go-to-market strategy and international growth. He's also an advisor and investor with Tech Operators, a network that helps ambitious startups scale internationally. Paul Terry, welcome to the show.
Delighted to be here, Natalie. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you in the conversation today. And like I mentioned in your intro, you have spent your career building and scaling international sales teams. And I know you've really had a front row seat to a lot of big shifts in how go-to-market actually works. So I'd love to dive into one of those key transformations that you led during the time we were at Forrester. And I'm now going to take us back to the early 2010s when you helped champion and lead the rollout of social selling with LinkedIn. And I'll remind our listeners that this was at a time when social selling was barely even a thing. So can you take us back to that moment and talk about what was the transformation you were trying to drive, and kind of we'll talk about how you navigated that shift.
Sure thing. Well, so the context was that it was 2012. I had been leading Forrester's emerging market business for a number of years up until that point. And at a certain moment, I received a tap on the shoulder from my boss and yours, Charles Rothstein, he was Chief Operating Officer at the time. And he said, look, we're going to be shifting our entire organization from one CRM platform to another. It's a significant lift. And being an analyst firm, as Forrester was, the first thing an analyst would tell a customer who was considering such a significant technology pivot, the first thing they would say is, this IT implementation is far too important to leave it up to IT, because, if it's led from the technology team, you'll end up with a wonderful piece of tech, a wonderful piece of kit, but, nobody will use it. So it needs to be designed by the business, for the business, and led by the business. And so he asked me to be that business leader to take on that transformation for the company. So we spent about a year very thoughtfully, very diligently mapping out every single process we had in the business today across every department, not just customer facing. We then broke those down and rebuilt them with the ideal of, this is a moment in time where we could really start fresh, if you like. And then we built the new CRM iteration to support those changes. And along the way, LinkedIn came knocking on my door and said, hey, look, there's this thing we've got. It's called social selling. We think it's going to be huge. What do you think? And as a sales leader for an extended period of time, I had been kind of banging my head off a wall because every year my targets were going up, but my resources were staying flat or in some cases even reducing. And I was smart enough to know I had a problem, but I wasn't smart enough to know what the solution to that problem could be, except, make more phone calls, send more emails, have more meetings, send more proposals, et cetera, et cetera. And when LinkedIn shared with me their vision for what as it was called then, social selling could be, it was for me a slaphead moment. And by slaphead moment, I meant, I literally took the heel of my hand and I slapped my head and I thought, oh my God, this is so clearly the future of go-to-market. This is so clearly the way buyers want to be engaged that salespeople have to get on this bus. So without hesitation, I leaned into it. We took, I think it was 450 licenses of a very nascent tool. It wasn't even called Sales Navigator at that time. The tool itself was less important to me. It was more the philosophy of how we needed to change the way we go about engaging our customers. And we rolled it out across the entire organization. And I kind of thought, that's my job done. I delivered on the tool. I sat back. I waited for the plaudits to arrive. And I thought, they'll be building statues to me in headquarters, or they'll be naming new, department, they'll be naming wings of the building after me because I've led this change. But in fact, all I heard was silence, absolute cricket. And I realized that what was completely obvious to me, understandably enough, wasn't obvious to 449 other people for whom I had bought these licenses. And I fell at the first hurdle of transformation. The first hurdle of change management is it's an incredibly laborious, detailed, repetitive process that requires you to, in your mind, over communicate, but to the audience, just about communicate enough. And to communicate through multiple channels, there's a very clear playbook for driving change of this nature. And it involves getting executive sponsorship, giving the executives a voice. It involves moneyballing, so that you're looking for wins and socializing those wins. It involves communicating through meetings, emails, video, carrier pigeon. It involves repeating yourself to your mind ad nauseum, in the hope that ultimately people will hear the message, because we all learn in different ways. And so what I thought was going to make me a hero in terms of transformation, very, very nearly, I would have thought maybe even came close to getting me fired, because I'd spent a significant amount of money on this process of change, but it appears I wasn't delivering anything for it. Now, to LinkedIn's great credit, they leaned in and they applied additional support in helping us roll it out, training, engagement with the audience, and so on. And the number one thing I learned about this change was, actually, it was the things I've just described there, but one particular thing was I failed to treat and address the most important people in that organization independently from everybody else. And that's the frontline management cohort. So with their combination of proximity to the front line and their span of control, frontline managers are the most important people in a sales organization, because they are the culture carriers, and they influence the day-to-day experience of the largest body of employees in the business. And I hadn't pulled them apart. I hadn't pre-wired them. I hadn't helped them understand what was coming down the pipe. So literally on that very first Monday morning when, the licenses rolled out, I can imagine that conversations went along the lines of the sales reps and the CS people and all of the customer-facing folks get an email going, hey, you've got this tool now. They turn to their manager and say, hey, what is this thing I've just got? And the manager goes, I don't know. I just got it too. Right? So huge learning for me there was not only treat it like a truly change management or exercise, but also carve out that cohort of frontline managers and get them on board before anything else. So, since then, I'd like to hope a lot better at managing those transformations and those changes, because that was a key learning. And you definitely learn more from your failures, or in this case, near failures. The happy outcome was we did indeed manage to, deploy appropriately. And I'm very, very proud that I was closely involved in pivoting the way an entire commercial organization in a highly respected international brand went to market, and continues to do so today. And as you correctly pointed out, this was 2012, so long before social selling and all of these concepts were becoming mainstream.
Yeah. I think it's such a tremendous example, and it's bringing me back a bit nostalgically to what sales and marketing looked like back in that time. But I think the example that you gave with the frontline managers reminds me of like the distinction between like what feels to a sales org as like a corporate initiative of like, oh, we have to check the box and do this, to like what makes it all about them and the value, and like bringing them through that journey as you learned and did. And I think that piece about over communication is so important, because to the person leading the change, like I hear this in almost every conversation I'm having with leaders, is uh, like it feels like we're over communicating or repeating ourselves. But that is the area that continually needs more kind of more feeding.
You learn from your mistakes. It's even better to learn from somebody else's mistakes because it's far less painful. And 3 years subsequent to that transformation, I ended up joining LinkedIn as a member of the team selling at this point, Sales Navigator. And I was able to sit with prospects and clients around the world and essentially tell them this tale of woe and say, look, these are the things you got to watch for. This isn't as obvious. This isn't an obvious win for your organization as it is for you. And you've got to follow these steps if you're going to make this stick, and I like to think that helped our customers quite a lot.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that it did. I'm curious to ask you, like, do you remember any tipping point in kind of that change management journey? Like, when did it take hold, and kind of what did you experience there?
Yeah, do you know what? It actually came from marketing. I said to my
Oh,
sales
marketing.
leader. So Forrester's CMO at that point called me up and said, "Hey, look, I hear you bought some of these licenses. Are any chance you could throw a few over the fence? We'd love to play around with them." And so I passed a few over, and he came back to me not long afterwards, and he said, "Look, this is amazing. We've got an opportunity here to light up this network of 450 employees by putting bite-sized, easily managed, easily consumed content in a kind of a menu format for them, and they can pick and choose which ones they share on LinkedIn." And so it enabled 450 voices within the Forrester organization to have a voice without having to, write their own full-on content. We're not all Richard Bransons who write long-form content for LinkedIn. It's enough to curate other people's content as long as it resonates with you, as long as you believe in it, as long as you support it. And so we were in a position now to dramatically enhance our presence on the LinkedIn platform by putting content easily within reach of the users. And with that, I think reps began to see that turning point. Crucially, reps began to engage prospects and clients on the platform. Crucially, they began to win business via that engagement. And then we were sailing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great testament to like the different purviews of sales and marketing, and like how and why that partnership can be so impactful. And I remember from the marketing side, when I first joined Forrester, maybe 2005, 2006, social media was something, right? If you had it up on your screen, like you didn't want anyone looking over your shoulder to like very quickly, like if you're not learning how to use this and taking the reins, like shame on you, right? So it's just
Absolutely.
changed
We
very
had
quick.
clients, Forrester, we had clients who banned LinkedIn on company devices, right? Because they felt it was it was a version of Facebook. They felt it was a distraction, not a business tool.
Yeah, which reminds me of, AI and ChatGPT and all that in the early days. A lot of companies like defaulted very quickly to banning this. And I remember there's a conference I go to every year called the Marketing AI conference, which I'll put a quick plug for them because they do cover a range of go-to-market roles. So anyone who's interested, it's really good. But the first year that I went, I'd spoken with a few marketers who said their companies don't allow it. They're trying to learn a bit on their own. By the following year, I think anyone whose company wasn't allowing it was already there looking for a new role, right? Realized that skill set was so essential for them to learn and be part of it that, you don't want to be somewhere that doesn't allow it and support it.
Mhm.
I'm curious, Paul, to get a little more on the kind of softer side of the change. And maybe before you hit that kind of tipping point, were there any points where you were kind of fearful in your decision, or like maybe any like distrust in yourself, like before it had caught on? And if so, kind of how did you navigate that?
Absolutely, is the short answer. Again, I would describe it as an emotional roller coaster. For me, it was this very obvious, water in the desert type thing. You would think that water in the desert you wouldn't need to have to push it or sell it, but turns out you do. So I started this very high, very enthusiastic. This is going to be amazing. I went through this dip where I realized, my gosh, it could be very expensive and embarrassing misstep on my part to when it came back up again. And indeed, I again as part of my passing on those learnings, I used to sit with prospects when I was in LinkedIn, prospects of this service, and I would say to them exactly. I would say, if you do this and it doesn't work, the 50, 100K, whatever it is you spend with us, it won't kill your business. Your business won't go out of business because you've made the wrong decision here. But it will cost you your political capital as an individual. It'll cost you your reputation as an individual, and it might even cost you your job. So it's not a financial risk you're taking, it's a reputational risk. And you need to be really, really, you're willing to take on that risk. The flip side is if you see it through and you make it work, well, then you will be the person who has pivoted the way your entire business goes to market. And that is a prize worth pursuing. And so that was exactly the journey I was on. I was, I thought this is great. Oh my God, I'm in deep trouble. Oh my God, it worked out. And my political capital would have been shot to hell. I was fortunate in that I had a lot of trust at the executive level of Forrester. But if it had not worked out, fast forward a year, if I came with the next great idea, for sure, Charles and the crew would be scratching their head and going, well, the last time he had an idea, it didn't quite work out. So we're just going to pass on this one. So that is the risk you're running. It's reputational risk. So you have to be aware of that and be ready to take it on.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's an important way of thinking about it. And then I think, myself, like earlier in my career, when I kind of had these kind of hunches or gut instinct and where something was headed, I might have said them a little too quietly, and then you risk, right, not actually having the impact. Um, but I think over the years I've learned like it just how like also how you frame the argument, right? Like here's my thinking, here's my evidence behind it, here's what others are saying, right? So building that consensus so it's coming from kind of a broader wave than yourself, and that I know makes a difference as well.
For sure. I mean, we live in an era today, and this is pertinent to sales and how salespeople approach their customers today. But we live in an era where FOMO was, a fear that we all had for a long time, fear of missing out. And so salespeople would kind of play to that FOMO and say, oh, you got to sign today or you don't get the discount, or your competitors are doing this, you need to do it or you'll be left behind. But actually buyers and decision makers and people influencing the decisions of their companies today are actually suffering from a concept of FOMO, which is fear of messing up. And so we look to kind of syndicate out those decisions, share the responsibility for those decisions so that if it goes wrong, we feel less exposed. And this is a concept that has been kind of crystallized by a guy called Matt Dixon, who wrote The Challenger Sale when he was at CEB, or maybe after he left CEB. And a couple of years ago, he's followed the Challenger concept up with this concept called the Jolt effect. And he talks about fear of messing up. And absolutely, I see it every day. We're all looking to have other people in the boat with us when you make a significant decision. And I understand it, but it can slow us down as businesses too.
Yeah, yeah. I think this is a great segue because I'd love to dive more into kind of changes in buyer behavior, and I think we're experiencing a lot of those right now. And I think for years we've all known that right buyers are showing up like uh, more informed, further along in their journey before they kind of talk to sales. But I think right now, like one area we're seeing is like how much of the buyer journey has gone off the grid or happening in like peer communities, private conversations, Slack groups, etc. Which I think to your point, like brings in some of that like fear of messing up, like, oh, well, other people are doing this too. So you're kind of getting that insight. And then just, broader impacts from kind of AI and all of that. So Would love to just hear a bit more broadly, like what are these bigger shifts that you're seeing in, buyer behavior and related selling motions? And you just touched on it a bit, but would love for you to go deeper.
Certainly, and in particular, this is particularly pertinent for startups or scaling businesses that are maybe still founder led. They don't have the track record, the history of engagement with their prospect competitors or peers, right? So if you're at the buyer, you're gonna engage with one of these smaller companies, you are taking that reputational risk. And there was a time, certainly when I started out in sales, you found that one buyer and you hung on to her until she got the deal done, she signed the contract, and you were like, yes, I'm home free. And that is so far from the reality today, right? And again, I go back to research that came out of CEB, has been coming up for many years now, owned by Gartner, where the number of people involved in making a B2B buying decision is growing year over year. We're operating in more matrixed environments. Departments and indeed geographies are more closely collected than they were before. And so you're looking at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 plus people getting involved in making a significant B2B purchasing decision. So for me, that's the biggest change from when I would have started out in sales, that a salesperson today is almost a conductor of an orchestra. And that's a terminology, that's an image that would have been used in the past, but it would have been conducting your own resources, your sales engineers, your customer success, your finance team. But now you're conducting the influencers within that syndicated purchasing decision. And so if you're not, as a salesperson, if you're not leaning into uncovering who else is involved in the hope that they won't get involved, you're absolutely kidding yourself. Right. So, I'm actually teaching a class on this in the University College Dublin at the moment on B2B sales. And I have an image on one of the slides of a firefighter running into a fire. And what I say is great salespeople, they run towards the fire. So if they're talking to their sponsor or their champion, they're proactively asking who else is involved in this decision. And if the champion's not forthcoming, they're even referencing previous engagement. They're saying, I've been selling this service for a while. I've seen that the CFO is getting involved. Are you sure she doesn't need to be involved in this decision? Because you could try to, stick your head in the sand and hope that the CFO is not getting involved, but knowledge is power. And the sooner you know about it, the sooner you can address the CFO's concern directly, and you can, turn a potential detractor into a sponsor. And so running into the fire means being proactive in exposing what that full buying committee looks like and being brave enough to engage them.
Yeah.
That for me is the biggest one.
Yeah, I love that. And this concrete examples of running towards the fire, I think is so important. Like, I think too, from the marketing standpoint, and what marketing needs to do to support that is having that like coherent narrative that addresses all the different audiences, right? Like, take the example of like the CFO is looking at cost, operations sees kind of disruption to workflow, or kind of depending on what the solution is, and procurement sees kind of the risk, let's say. You really want to make sure you're enabling sales with that coherent narrative that they can use, and then kind of tailored per role. But I think it's kind of that interplay between what needs to happen in the one-to-many narrative, and then the one-to-one, and like the salesperson pushing and probing and asking in all the right places.
Absolutely, because what gets the business sponsor on the bus won't get the CFO, and vice versa. You got to understand what their objections are, and then you have to address them individually, so that when they get together in the room where you most certainly are not present, they've all got their reasons for saying yes.
This is Natalie, your Shift and Thrive host. After chatting with lots of CEOs, one thing is crystal clear. Leveling up your company means having a killer go-to-market strategy. That's what my crew at Magnitude Consulting does every day. If you're trying to step up your marketing game, whether it's strategizing, accelerating your pipeline, expanding into new markets, or getting into AI and automation, let's talk. No pitch, no pressure, just good conversation. Visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com/Natalie to schedule a time. Can't wait to connect. When you were talking about the FOMO, the fear of messing up, you brought up the jolt effect. Can you talk about that for us?
Sure. It's actually a book I keep on my desk. Actually, well, I keep it in the bookshelf over here, but I was afraid it might come up, so I wanted to keep it handy. Um, Matt and Ted McKenna, they actually took advantage of COVID by being able to digest tens of thousands of sales calls because, in an instant, a whole bunch of sales calls that were never recorded and were offline because they were face to face across the table were now recorded and online because they moved to the screen. And so they were able to look for trends and patterns and so on. And what they found was, traditionally, as I said, salespeople are using FOMO, so fear of missing out. They're driving a sense of scarcity and urgency, etc., to get the deal over the line. And early on in the sales process, that is important still. You have to keep the customer engaged. You have to remind them why they reached out to you in the first place, why they're speaking to you, of the pain that they're feeling. That's got to be front and center. But at a certain point, the customer gets to the conclusion, you know what, this is the right solution for me, or this is better than what I'm doing today. And it's at that point, you need to flip the script a little bit. And now you need to ensure that the customers feel comfortable with the decision. And in this book and in the data that they have gathered, they have estimated that somewhere around 60% of all live opportunities are lost to no decision. And that's not the customer going, you know what, my status quo is good enough, I'm just going to stay with it. That's the customer saying, I think your solution is better than what I've got, but I'm still going to do nothing. And the reason is that, and this is according to the authors, so I actually don't want to take any credit for the intellectual firepower behind this book. I'm literally just repeating what I've learned from them. And the conclusion is that the buyers today, they fear the mistake of commission over the mistake of omission. Meaning, I make a decision to go with you as a vendor and it proves to be wrong. Well, I talked earlier about reputational risk and indeed potentially employment risk, right? However, if I choose not to make a decision and it proves to be wrong, well, I'm in the same boat as everybody else because nobody else made that decision either. So we're sharing this mistake of omission. We omitted to make the decision and we did that together. And so they're afraid, buyers are more and more increasingly afraid to make that mistake of commission. And that's why they want to bring other people into the mix. They want other people to have an opinion. They're taking everybody's perspective on board before they make a shared or syndicated choice. And that's what salespeople now need to address through this multi-threading we talked about earlier, but also by showing social proof, by making informed recommendations, maybe by encouraging the customer to go small at the start, not take down the big deal, take down a small deal, get them comfortable with that small deal, and then expand from there. All of these are tactics that will help to minimize that FOMO, that fear of messing up.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's so helpful. And then I think like with this risk aversion theme, you layer on top of that today's kind of market uncertainty and kind of some folks afraid to pull the trigger just because of kind of the volatility in the market. And in addition to kind of building consensus, there's what else you need to give them as an organization, right? Like, is it more proof points? Is it more peer validation? Like, what are the kinds of things you think about like need to be dialed in at the company level to help kind of de-risk, I guess, in the view of the buyer?
Yeah. So for me, it's certainly proof points. I mean, case studies. I mean, you can read those all day long and, twice on Sundays. They only give you so much. Obviously, they're just super, super positive stories about people who use your solution. Even better, I think, is, setting up a one-to-one call with an existing customer and not being on that call yourself, right? So that there's no pressure. The existing customer is sharing warts and all, right? Their experience. Another one that I found to be quite effective over the years was gathering, for late stage pipeline of opportunities, getting some late stage decision makers in the room around a nice dinner with a ratio of maybe 3 to 1. So 3 prospect, late stage with one, happy customer who's willing to talk around the table. And maybe you do that with 2 or 3 different tables in a nice restaurant, high-end restaurant in whatever city you're targeting it to work in. So that you're giving the opportunity for peers to share experience. And that's why I think my experience when I was at LinkedIn, when I would sit a prospect and say, look, you might lose your job if you don't do this properly. My sales team originally were petrified to have their leader sit down and say that to a customer who was on the verge of signing a contract. But over time, they saw the impact of that, and that was that you build an immense amount of trust if you're saying to somebody, be very careful about working with us. You got to make sure you've talked this through because there is risk for you. Because it's incredibly transparent, right? And the last thing a customer expects a seller to say, right? To be so truthful, if you like, that there is risk and calling out that risk, but then helping them understand that you're there. Not only do you see the risk, you acknowledge it, you've lived it, but you're there to help minimize it indeed as well. So that these are tactics that I have found to be effective in helping to reduce that FOMO over time.
Yeah, yeah. I think those are great. I too am a big, big believer in these kind of like intimate dinners. I think a place that's often overlooked is companies are going to conferences left and right, but they're not thinking of how do we kind of take advantage of like physically being in that location. I know we've worked with a number of clients to kind of put on these small dinners, and I like what you're saying about right the warts and all, right? Whether that's a one-to-one customer call or like just being very uh realistic and upfront about kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think we're in an environment where everyone like needs more trust to making their decisions, and that's kind of exactly what that does. So I think spot on. I want to ask you, Paul, a bit more broadly, when you're working with CEOs and founders today, are there any big kind of go-to-market mistakes that you're seeing, like any themes from the work you're doing?
Yeah. Funny thing is sometimes, I end up working with firms that have a solution that can really help so many different people within their client organizations. And so they kind of, when I work with them on, ICP, ideal customer profiling, and I say, okay, who could be your buyer here? And they go, well, or your user, your end user. Could be this profile or that profile. And it could be anybody. And I say, well, that's amazing. The fact that it could be everybody also means it could be nobody, right? Because you're going in there so broadly. So I try to give direction around defining as narrowly as possible the ICP. And we use a concept, again, not my concept, of a wedge, right? So even though all of these people here could be your users and your buyers, there's a great risk that they'll all be looking at each other to sign the contract and put their hands in the pocket to spend the budget. So you got to go in with your very tight wedge, get that person to engage, to evaluate, to see the value, to purchase, and then you can expand. And so that's the guidance that I try to bring when I'm dealing with founders. And the great thing about founders is their level of enthusiasm and energy is off the chart. That's also the bad thing, because often founders are the least critical of their own solution, which actually leads me to the second piece of advice that I often bring to bear with them, which is, find that narrow edge, get in there, rock it, but be ready that if it doesn't work, be ready to change. And a couple of firms that I'm working with at the moment, actually as an investor, I take great solace in the founder's willingness to literally shift their business model dramatically, because they found that what they thought was the right approach hasn't been working, and they pivot. Pivot is a very heavily used word in that stage of business these days, but they're pivoting their business model and they're pivoting their target ICP because they're not precious about the original idea. And you have to be ready to give up on that original idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I talk to a lot of investors, and sometimes that's kind of a key piece that they say about the founders that are successful and the ones who are not, is the willingness to kind of call their baby ugly, or evolve, find the fit. And I think, like as you say, that can be the ICP, It can be something you brought up earlier around like, is there a different kind of entry point into the solution, like a smaller kind of POC or a try before you buy type of model? Is it a shift in the go-to-market model, right? Like partnership or ecosystem led rather than kind of sales or product led. Um, so I think it's so important to not be swayed and kind of do too many things at once, but then also when you see that something is not working, be ready to evolve. And I think
Yeah.
on the ICP, it can feel very scary to say, okay, this is the audience we're focusing on, and kind of to the exclusion of others. I always make the point, it's as much as it might feel kind of risky or scary, it becomes risky and expensive not to focus, right? And so I think that's a point that often kind of helps founders see things a bit differently. I'm curious, Paul, to take us in a slightly different direction. I know you've done a lot of work with kind of building and leading international sales organizations, and I want to talk a little bit about the cultural piece. So, can you talk a bit just about how you think about different go-to-market approaches, different ways of kind of thinking about sales across different geographies?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would say on culture is that the culture you choose in terms of which company you choose to work with and for um, often says more about who you are than the culture into which you were accidentally born. So, like I've worked in very multicultural international business over the years, and I often feel more in common with my colleagues from different countries than I do my compatriot, who live around me, right? So why? Because I'm born in Ireland, I'm born Irish, I'm thrilled and flattered and honored. I wouldn't want to be anything else, but it was accidental, right? I just happened to be there. But I consciously chosen to work at companies like Forrester and at LinkedIn and at Untutored, where I leaned into the same culture and values that my colleagues did. And I felt and still feel that very strong bond with those people. We've got so much in common, even though we come from different countries and backgrounds. But then in terms of how do you build out an international business across cultures and across markets? Well, there's a continuum, right? On the one end of the continuum, you could say, hey, you know what? We are going to standardize every step and every aspect of our go-to-market from soup to nut. And I don't care if we're selling in Saudi Arabia or Senegal or, France or Frankfurt. Doesn't matter. It's all going to be the same. And you're going to lose a lot of business, or you're going to lose a lot of opportunity from not being culturally aware and culturally friendly. The other end of the continuum is you acknowledge, oh my goodness, all these places are different. So we're going to allow every particular market to operate absolutely independently of each other. And the downside there is, you might win business locally, but you won't be able to scale it and serve it in an economical way, right? Because now you've got lots of little businesses without any economy of scale, all running around doing the wrong thing. So what I had found to be the happy medium and most beneficial over the years has been to standardize and operationalize as much as you possibly can of the go-to-market, but then hire for and trust to the local expertise to take that, as we used to call it in the telco industry, that last mile, to take what you've got and to adapt to the local environment, the local culture, how you go about engaging those customers. In the Netherlands, the concept around having a working lunch is very different from having one in Italy, or even in Belgium, actually, which shares a border and a language to a certain degree with the Netherlands. The way they go about a business lunch is dramatically different. And if a Dutch person tries to have a Dutch business lunch with Belgians, it just doesn't sit as well, and vice versa. So you have to have that local resource, that local capability to bring that last piece, but you also need to standardize and operationalize. And it's finding that blend is the fascinating part. It's a puzzle, but it's a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's great advice, and I appreciate what you said about the kind kind of the company culture versus kind of the country you're born into. It reminds me a bit of kind of the friends you choose versus the family you're born into. And there's kind of likeness in both, but in different ways. I'm thinking too about this, like the level of standardization um, between kind of corporate versus what to personalize for the needs and kind of market maturity and everything of each individual country. Because from the marketing standpoint, we've seen it kind of go haywire in a number of different ways. And I think similarly, like it's helpful to have a corporate marketing function that is overseeing the business globally. And if it's a smaller company, even just one person, but then not leaning on that person to do the in-market selling and marketing in the different regions, and whether you kind of hire a marketing person or team locally or work with a kind of agency or marketing partner. Um, it's that same kind of model of, you know, you want the operations and kind of the overarching structure to be at the corporate level, but then you need to recognize that, different countries operate differently and uh, to, tailor on so many different levels.
For sure. And sometimes the economies in different the economies of your business are going to be different from market to market. And, and you can choose to just focus in the highest grossing markets for yourself, or you can pay a tax on internationalization and say, okay, in this particular market, I'll be paying the sales rep the same, but her quota is going to be a little bit lower because that market is not yet mature. So it's about what's your appetite. Are you willing to take, lower economies in an emerging market, or are you just going to stay in your core market forever? In which case you'll never grow beyond, wherever you started your business.
Yeah. I'm sure the answer to this question is going to be a bit of it depends. But do you have any general advice around, how quickly to expand into other regions, how to know when you're ready, anything along those lines?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I won't give defined numbers here because, as you said, it really does depend. But I would say, product market fit in a core or a couple of core markets first, where you've got your process and you know what's working. You've done a lot of A/B testing. You know who your ICP is. You know how to engage that ICP. You know how to close the deal in as optimum a time frame as possible. And now you brought in a bunch of clients. There's still plenty more to go, but you've got an operation that you can now adapt to other markets. So I wouldn't be in a rush to go out there and say I'm global first. And although today, as digital businesses, we can be global first, right? We can be selling to anybody, anywhere in the world. I would be looking to capture a meaningful portion of my core market, start paying my bills, start making sure that I've got turnover and I've got repeatability in my business. And then I'd be looking to scale and adapt that elsewhere, to look for customers with a similar profile, albeit in different markets.
Yeah, that is very good advice. So thank you, Paul. I want to end our conversation on maybe a bit more of an introspective note and thinking, over the course of your career, what would you say is the best piece of advice that you've been given, or at least kind of the piece of advice that's shaped you or stuck with you most?
So I would say one piece of advice that I guess, is it advice? I guess it was. Somebody would have said it to me originally, that I kind of live my life by is feel the fear and do it anyway. So, there's a lot of decisions in our lives that we that can instill uncertainty and fear. Thank you, fear. And just because we're afraid of it, that's not a good enough reason not to do it. Gotten me in trouble over the years, I would have to admit. There are some decisions, if I look back, I go, well, I hadn't made that decision. It might have been better. But I actually, for me, my greatest fear is not doing something. I have a greater fear of not doing something than I have of actually doing it. Or I fear the regret of not doing something, is a better way of putting it, than fear regretting doing it. So when I have a choice, I tend to feel the fear and do it anyway. More recently, actually, again, going back to Charles Rothstein, when I was going into my first PE-backed environment, Charles is now a full-time operating partner in a PE firm. So I called him up and I said, what's the one thing I need to know about, a PE environment that maybe I don't know yet? And he said, it's this. He said, the moment you accept the offer, the fuse gets lit. And actually, that's not just a PE environment, that's any environment. Particularly, if you're in GTN and if you're a senior leader, if you're invited into a business, be it public, private, PE, VC, doesn't matter. They're not bringing you in because things are going great. Not like, hey, we're making so much money, come on in and join, right? They're bringing you in because there's something that needs fixing. And in today's environment with shortened horizons, particularly in our current economic climate, there's not the luxury of time that we've had in the past to kind of pause, evaluate, figure stuff out, and then, tweak around the edges. The fuse gets lit the day you say yes. And the expectations are that you're going to drive change quickly. Just be aware of that.
I think that's great advice. And you brought it full circle back to where we started, right? In today's times, in a world where we need to constantly kind of evolve and transform, we don't have a choice, right? And so that, that really does resonate. And as we wrap up today's conversation, can you let listeners know how they can reach you if they want to get in touch?
Sure. Probably no surprise at this point in the conversation, I'm a very active LinkedIn member, a proud member to be on LinkedIn. And so you can always find me there, Paul Terry. There's a few Paul Terrys on there, I guess, but you'll find the right one.
Sounds great. Thank you. And thank you so much for everything that you shared today. I loved hearing so much of what we talked about, from the lessons learned around change management with the social selling, the fear of messing up, and kind of the shifts in how today's buyers operate and what that means for what salespeople need to do, and the conversation about narrowing the ICP and being able to pivot quickly. So thank you so much for all of this, Paul.
My pleasure. Thank you, Natalie.
My pleasure as well. And thank you too to everyone who's listening. If today's conversation sparked something for you, and I'm sure that it did, please pass this along to another leader. We all know that insights like this really fuel fresh thinking and help all of us drive real transformation in our companies and in ourselves. So thanks again, Paul. And this has been another amazing conversation on Shift and Thrive. I'll see you all next time. That's a wrap for this week's episode. For show notes and more, visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service marketing agency to help B2B companies fuel their growth. For more information on Magnitude and to get your complimentary transformation readiness assessment, visit magnitudeconsulting.com/getready. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.